In this episode, we're going to be talking about reproducibility and the importance of empowering adults. This is the Youth Ministry Mindset Podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Youth Ministry Mindset Podcast with voices from Alpha and YDisciple out of Net Ministries. I'm your host, Joshua Danis, joined by co-hosts Jordan Berry and Annie Grandel. And today we're going to be moving through this continued conversation about the shift from transactional ministry to transformational ministry. This time we're going to be looking at the lens of reproducibility. And in this, we really want to unpack the question of how and to what degree we need to be empowering adults in the ministry.
Before we do that, though, real important question. Do you like my shirt? How's that for the only woman at the table?
Love it.
It's a great fashion sense you have.
You know,
Annie.
that's really important to me. I wanted to wear this shirt because it's, for those of you just listening, it's a fabulous doodle that says "You Are Seen," which really goes into what we're talking about. But it was made by Allie Hoffman, who's a friend of Net. She's an alumnus. She worked on one of our YDisciple series, and she's in the Youth Ministry Mindset course that let us use the name. So I wanted to give her and Edmund Mitchell a shout out. Go check her out on the Oodles of Doodles, which is amazing. Also, she's on YouTube. She and her dad made a viral video during the height of quarantine, and it's flippin' hilarious. So Anyway, just wanted to give a shout out.
Have you ever gone viral for anything?
Never.
Yeah,
like
me
literally
neither.
never.
She needs to be a part of this podcast. She's probably the expert.
She's ridiculous. But yeah, no, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, empowering adults. As a youth minister, I was tasked with building the youth group. And I didn't set out to be the celebrity. But I, several years in, looked back and realized that that's what I was doing. I was building a youth ministry around myself, my own gifts, and being the center of the relationships that were happening. And it was ultimately unhealthy because here's the fact of the matter. I'm great. That's the fact of the matter. No. The fact of the matter is that I'm going to have great relationships with some students, but there's going to be some students who think I'm crazy and annoying and don't want anything to do with me, and therefore didn't want anything to do with our ministry. Yeah. And when we shifted the focus of our ministry to being a little less moi-centric, to really empowering adults, not to be just volunteers, but to be mentoring, to be co-youth ministers in the ministry, we saw a huge shift. We saw students coming back that I hadn't seen literally in years.
Wow.
I remember one night when I was the center of all youth ministry, it took over my entire calendar, right? And I had to be at everything. I remember one night when our old ministry had always run on Sunday nights. Well, there was one Sunday after we had kind of decentralized things. I was actually at a family event, which I never would have been able to be at on a Sunday before. And my husband and I were driving back to our home, which was in the town we ministered in. And we drove past the local coffee shop. And as we drove by, I could see a small group with a leader who wasn't me meeting in there. I remember looking at Jason and saying, youth ministry is happening right now in the Catholic community in this town, and I'm not there. And it was such an exciting moment because that moment made me realize good things were happening when it wasn't all about me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's funny because we think if I'm the youth minister, then my job is to minister to the youth. And to a certain extent, that's true. But in a lot of ways, the greater role you can have is representing a youth context to all of the adults of the parish, to the pastor of the parish, to the parents, and then especially to those adults that are called to minister to the youth so that they can be more effective.
Yeah. I think for youth ministers listening, we need to champion the way forward of integrating youth ministry with the whole of the church. And part of the way is doing that, empowering young adults or empowering adults to be a part of the ministry. And here's what I learned too is students vote with their feet. And when they feel known and seen, they're going to flock to wherever that is.
Yeah.
And as the ministry, maybe we'll say attendance, we've already mentioned that attendance isn't the only metric here, but as the ministry grows, it needs to feel smaller. Like, so you have 100 students coming, it should feel for that student like, oh, my people are there. Not 100, my 4, my 5. And the reason why we need more adults is because if it's going to feel smaller, your relational capacity, my relational capacity really taps out about like 3, 4, 5. Jesus had 12.
Yep.
Let's not dare say that we can be better than Jesus in this, but our relational capacity taps out. So we need more people to rally with us in order to care well for the students that are coming, that are being a part of the ministry. And that's what they're looking for too. Students are looking just to be known, seen. They're going to walk in. They want to know if a leader of the ministry remembers the time that they talked about their grandma having cancer. Now, if you have 50 kids in your ministry or 20 kids in the ministry you're leading and it's just you, I mean, good luck. Like, there's no way you're going to remember all the stories. But if you have a team of 5, 10, 12, you can actually create a culture being known and seen. And that's what empowering and reproducing yourself looks like. Yeah.
I really miss parish ministry. I love my job. There's a lot of things I really miss about being a parish youth minister. But one of the things I love about not being a parish youth minister is now I'm just a volunteer. I get to volunteer at my parish, and no one knows who I am. The girls in my small group could care less that I'm doing a podcast on youth ministry. That doesn't matter to them. They matter if they're known. It matters to them if they're known, if they're seen. And I love being able to have that individual focus now with just a small group of young women.
Yeah. And one of the things that always comes up when we talk about this is we always talk about, well, what do you look for? What do you look for in a leader? Because you just want to go, you don't want to grab anyone off the street and be like, you can be a leader, you can be a leader, you can be a leader. I mean, that's just not.
I'm pretty sure a safe environment
you
would
should
not
be
love
fired.
that.
You should be fired at that point. But one of the things that we're always looking for when you're looking for leaders, looking for people to join the ministry with you, empowering adults, is you're looking for people who are relationally intelligent. And if we could go back to some of the other podcasts we talked about, but man, are they interested in young people, or are they just worried about being really interesting? And you can find that there's some 70-year-old men that actually will be some of your best leaders. They'll be the best youth ministers because they are so interested in young people. They're so interested in students. Don't think, oh, it has to be college students and that's it. And anyone listening to this who thinks, oh, I can't ever serve in youth ministry, yes, you can. If you have a heart for young people and if you have a heart for Jesus, you could totally serve in youth ministry. Believe me, you'll be a rock star to them. So anyway, relational intelligence, that's one. The second thing is spiritual velocity. And I talk about this being just, are you becoming more like Jesus, or are you just kind of doing the thing? You're doing your thing. You're just kind of going through the motions of the day, you know. Are you passionately in love with Jesus and allowing him to lead your life? Then if you are, hey, that's a great marker of being a great leader. So relational intelligence, spiritual velocity. And then the last one, and this is important, especially when you're changing culture, is teachability. You have to find people who are teachable. The people who know everything there is to know about young people and youth, and the ones that say, well, back in my day, you know, that to me is a red flag. I mean, so if you're out there in youth ministry listening to this and you're like, well, what am I looking for? For me, I was always looking for 3 things: teachability, relational intelligence, spiritual velocity. And just one conversation, you can pick up on all those things right away.
Yep. And I love that you said you don't have to be young to work in youth ministry. That's a very strong myth that is carried on for some time, but it's a myth. My best leaders were retired folks, were empty nesters, partly because they had the time. They had the availability. They didn't have young kids that they were also managing. But also they had that relational intelligence. They'd raised teenagers. They'd been there. One of my favorites was an old retired high school football coach. He got young men, and he was a great mentor.
Yeah, it's funny. There's often this joke, speaking of football coaches, that the expected career of a youth minister falls about the same length as that of a professional football player. Most of them, it's going to be 2 to 3 years. There'll be a few diehard legends out there, the Tom Brady type folks who can make it 15, 20 years, but most of them have this short stint that they can do it. But that in and of itself presumes that it's all about the youth minister. Or if you're saying you can't have young volunteers, that in and of itself presumes that it's all about the volunteer. But the best volunteers and the best youth ministers, are making it about the teens, or making it about the volunteers who are making it about the teens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Guys, I would love to hear from you an example of a volunteer who was just out of this world good, and what made them so effective?
So there's a couple of guys that were friends, and they wanted to come, and they were older, probably 50, 60, you know, and they came in, and our ministry was really like, it was taking off, and we were just like, okay, how do we best create small environments? We need to allow more space for us to care for our few. And we tried to recruit leaders left and right. And I got these couple older guys that are 50 and 60. And then I came up to trying to pairing them with guys, and they got the most ragtag misfit crew of all time. In fact, this is bad, but they basically was like, I don't know where to put these guys. I'm just going to put them with you. And so as they went through that, though, I was like, guys, I really need you to commit to longer than just a year or two. I need you to commit to maybe even going 7 years. They looked at me and they said, there's no way we're going 7 years with these guys. And I was like, just give it a go, man. Just give it a go, please. Just hang on there. And I was like, okay, wait, get to 8th grade, because they started in 6th grade. Get to 8th grade. And they're like, Jordan, we hate 6th grade. Like, how can we possibly get to 8th grade? So, but they did. They came week after week after week. Now, some couldn't come. Sometimes one couldn't come, but the other came. And sometimes they both were there. They were at every event that we did. We always made sure that the group was the same all the way through. They traveled up. We got to 8th grade. I went back to them. I said, hey, guys, do you want to keep going? And they said to me, Jordan, I would always travel with these guys.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa. I was like, whoa, okay, we've arrived. You know? And then they went to freshman year, and then sophomore year, and then junior year, and then senior year. And they went the total 7 years. And afterwards, I asked them, I was like, hey, guys, like, what do you think? What do you want to do now? And they said, well, we're going to keep in contact with these guys when they go to freshman year in college. We have 7 years invested in them, so we have to make sure that they're good.
Oh,
Wonderful.
And then here's what happened too. It's amazing. What happened too is when Thanksgiving came around, this is pre-COVID, and Christmas came around, all these college students came back, and the leaders had them over at their place to have dinner with them. Now, here's the amazing thing. And when these students left, and they said, oh, thanks, Jordan. Appreciate all you did. But then I was like, yeah, sure, man. You know. And then they went and hugged their small group leader, and they were like crying, praying with each other, like saying, like giving each other gifts as these students were entering into the next phase of life. Yeah. So these guys, though, they were not like your atypical, ultra cool college student. One was like old. One was like hard of hearing, you know? So it was like, but they loved these students. They loved their crew.
Well, and I love what you just described there, because what they did is they've invested so much in these relationships that they became an anchor for these young men who are going off to college. And so often in our youth ministry circles, we think, okay, they're done 12th grade. My job is done. Hope everything works out. Yeah. But we as the whole church have a responsibility to anchor with them and to assist them in lifelong transition. Yeah. And that even gives youth ministry a responsibility.
And this group of guys, they were the misfits. Man, they were hard. And you know, going 7 years is like, oh, it was all roses and beautiful, and they have these amazing, you know, mountaintop spiritual moments every day. It's like, no, oh man, they were in the trench. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there's one time I was at this event. We took them to an event that we did, and one of the kids punched down a 200-pound door, and you're like, where are these kids coming from? You know, like, well, I picked them off the streets. That's what happened. I went everywhere. And
so good.
But I remember the leader coming to me saying, like, look, my kid punched down a door. I was like, what? and he goes, but we had a conversation with him. Wow. And there's deep things going on in his life that came out, and we're working through it. So can you get the hotel staff to put the door back on? I was like, whoa, what's that? And so basically what happened is, like, in the moment, I mean, he literally punched down the door, but they're working through these deep issues that are kind of surfacing out now. And they were hard. They were hard issues that any adult would be like, yep, that'll wreck my life too. And it was a teenager. Yeah. So anyway, these guys walked with them, and they, through the amazing moments of them choosing to follow Jesus, and then the hard moments of them, like, wanting everything to do to walk away. But the thing that made them stay was this relationship they had formed over time with this leader. So,
Yeah.
and we had a lot of those, and we were so fortunate for that. But you said, hey, give me an example of a good leader, and those guys just came to mind right away.
Yeah. I had a hard time coming up with somebody because there's so many good stories I could tell. The one that comes to mind, when I think of trying to find a good unicorn who's available, who has that spiritual velocity, sometimes it feels like we're looking for a unicorn, right? Like, does this even exist? And this one was even more unique because he called me out of the blue and said, I want to work with teenagers. And I was like, what? Normally you have to, put in 1 million pulpit pitches and bulletin announcements, which you later realize like only 9% of the parish reads the bulletin anyway. And you're just begging to find leaders. This guy reaches out to me. He's the retired football coach I was telling you about. He and his wife had just moved to our town. He had been working with teenagers in football for years, and he said, I would love a group of teenage guys to be with. And I said, we were just getting our small group ministry off the ground, so we didn't have a group of guys there that was ready yet. I said, but can I plant you in confirmation? And said, here's what I want you to do. I'd love for you to be a confirmation leader. I'm going to give you a group of all guys, and I want you to just focus on the relationship and building trust with these young men, and maybe you can grow from confirmation. So, and that's what he did. And this guy showed up every single week. He was so attentive. He really understood what made teenage guys tick because he'd worked with them for so long. He was such a phenomenal listener. He was great at presenting the content, but he didn't over-present content. He didn't, I think you've described sometimes small group leaders can become like sermon 2.0, like they just pontificate the whole time. He had a great balance. One group of guys goes through confirmation and moves on. He stays in confirmation. He says, hey, can I stay in confirmation? Another group of guys comes and goes. Third year, another group of guys comes. They finish confirmation, and we say, if you want to keep going, like we did with all of our confirmation students, if you want to keep going, we would love to help you start a small group. Well, all of a sudden, this group of guys is like, yeah, this was an amazing experience. This wasn't a transactional experience. It was a transformational experience. And we said, if you could have anybody in the parish be your small group leader, who would you choose? And they said, Pat.
Wow.
The guy who'd been walking with these confirmation students for all these years, guy in his 70s. So he sticks with them, walks with them through the rest of their high school experience. And actually, this group of guys just graduated. But it all started with, I'm willing to do anything. And he saw the long game.
That's fantastic. Yeah, for me, so we've been talking about how you don't have to be a college student to be effective in youth ministry. So please forgive me. I'm actually going to take an example of a college student.
Well, and they're also good too.
They are good. I mean,
Can be good.
they have natural tendencies to be great out of the start.
Sure, and they're attractive. They're easily accessible. They're relatable to the young people. But those aren't necessarily good enough in and of themselves. Sure. You guys are talking about the shifts that really have to happen in our mentors in order for them to actually come alongside and accompany and give the support that young people need. And this young man, Andrew, did just that. So he finished his own participation in the youth ministry program. And a lot of people want to come back to youth ministry because they loved it, right? They want to come back because it was fun, it was enjoyable, it was exciting, and they don't want to leave that environment for themselves. But that wasn't the case with Andrew. And we knew it right away because as a junior and as a senior, Andrew was already taking ownership of a responsibility to mentor and support and listen to the junior high kids that were part of the program. He had this quiet, soft-spoken quality about himself. For Andrew, it was never about Andrew. And so when the opportunity came along to look for additional volunteers, and Andrew volunteered, we were thrilled. And just as he had done as a youth, he continued the process in college of just being available and being quiet and not being about him and him having this small sphere of influence, but deep impact on those that he was called to be with.
And I love that story because, again, I think one of the myths in youth ministry is you've got to be an extrovert, you've got to be the person who loves being upfront and funny, and that's not true. Like, you need an Andrew. You need that guy who is quiet and not focused on himself. He can do good ministry too.
Yeah.
To love teens and young people really well, have more adults in your life that can love them. And you're just not going to be able to share your heart with 1,000, 100, 50, 20. You have to have many people. And then another thing, when we talk about this, that I always hear from youth ministers is, well, where do I get them? Where do I find these leaders? Where do I look for them? It's like, I know what to look for now, but where am I going to find them? Well, your best leaders will actually recruit leaders for you. And what you can do with your current leaders is just ask them, saying, hey, who do you know that you think could be great at this? And they're going to have like a list of 3 or 4 people in their head. Now, the reality is maybe 1 or 2 of them may not be so great, but at least you can have people who say, hey, who do you think you would want to do this with? And what you're doing is you're inviting them to leverage their relational network to invite others into the mission, into the ministry that is toward young people. And that matters. That is significant, because now what you're doing is you're inviting leaders to create community, and inviting their community into it. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the other thing, you're talking about even recruiting going outside of yourself. So it's not just about the youth minister doing all the recruiting, asking your leaders. Parents are a great person to ask. I mean, if you ask a parent, who in this community do you want mentoring your son in the Christian life? They're going to have a list. A parent that's engaged in the faith and wants to be able to pass it on to their kid, they're going to be thinking of somebody in the pews. And it's likely somebody that, I know I went through this, I didn't even know. That I didn't know them directly, or I thought, oh, they're way too busy for us, or they're not going to be interested. Those were some of my best leaders. Asking students, who's already influencing you? Who in this community, teachers, coaches, has some sort of influence that we can bring in and teach them how to be disciple makers.
And that's really important, because what you're unpacking there is someone else has already observed that these folks have a spiritual gifting towards ministering and accessing in a positive way the lives of young people. And that's really important. I think too often in our ministry situations, we really are just looking for a volunteer who can be a warm body, who can be present to meet our standards for safe environment, and maybe they can hold a conversation or something. No, every single Christian has profound giftings poured into them through the Holy Spirit by God. And many of those folks will be called to serve in youth ministry. And those are the people that we need to identify and stir forth their giftings. Let's talk for a little bit about the community within the community, because I know in a lot of successful youth ministry programs, even though there's a great focus on serving the youth, the mentors and the volunteers find it a very rejuvenating and life-giving experience for themselves. And so what does that community of leaders look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the role of the youth minister is to, as you said, it's not influencing every single teenager in the parish. It's building and discipling the disciple makers. A really healthy youth minister is spending a lot of time with adults and not just time with teenagers. I remember there was a time I actually got reprimanded for spending too much time with adults and parents. It's not like I was just going out to beer with these folks and hanging out. Like, if that's what I was doing, yes, I should have been reprimanded. But building them up and teaching them and reproducing our ministry. There's a great line in the Lost Art of Disciple Making. Leroy IMC says that church leaders should be addicted to the vision of multiplication. So a good youth minister, which I wasn't for a very long time, is focused on multiplying themselves and multiplying leaders, and building community amongst those leaders. And it's simple things like having them over for dinner, having your training not just be practical but formative. We had an associate pastor, shout out to Father Jake Anderson, who, with my small group discipleship leaders, they would come over to my house. I'd make them dinner. We would have wine, and just be human together. We'd go over the practical things. But then the second half of our time, he would spend forming them. We were reading a book together, and we were talking about that and talking about our own prayer life and having accountability with one another. So that group of adults became a discipleship group in and of itself. Yeah. And because we had our associate helping us out with that, it was. It wasn't about me. I wasn't forming them. I got to be formed alongside them.
Yeah. Creating community, for those you're asking to create community, is one of the best things that you can do, because the reality is when you're in the trench, something goes hard, something goes sideways in the life of a student, you need another adult to lean into and say, hey, have you been here before? Have you gone through this? What do I do? Because it's hard. When you're in the trench and you're doing life on life ministry, it gets complicated. It's messy. And you need people to work alongside with you, to partner with you, go arm in arm in order to love young people really well.
Yep.
That's a funny thing about this concept of multiplication, because I'm sure a lot of youth ministers out there hear the idea of, okay, I'm giving away this responsibility, and I'm not being the rock star, and that's great, but all of a sudden, what am I here to do? And am I going to lose my job because there's no work for me to accomplish because everybody else is doing it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the best leaders out there, the ones who are the most attractive to be employed or whatever, are the ones who actually replace themselves really well and basically create a ministry around them in ways that they are there to champion a way forward, but they're allowing and empowering other people to do the ministry, to do the work of evangelization, to do the work of discipleship.
It's really great to hear you guys talking about this, and it reminds me of an experience with my wife, who's been doing youth ministry for a little over 10 years, seeing the impact she's had of the young people that were children, frankly, when she got started. And the ones that she focused on, every year she'd pray about it, and she'd pick 3 young people to really invest in those years. Obviously in appropriate ways based on child protection and safety and whatnot. But looking at it now, 10 years later, we can see the ones she was able to prioritize, the 3 that she was able to prioritize year after year, those are the ones who have gone on to be youth ministers. Those are the ones who have gone on to have professional careers in ministry or be building great Catholic families that are passing on the faith in their church community. And oftentimes, those that she wasn't able to connect in the deeper way are the ones who are still struggling with faith and not sure where they fit in all of this. And the truth is, she could say, well, I could have just spread myself out a little bit further and diluted my level of influence. Or better still, and this is something she's still striving to accomplish, if she can reproduce herself and have more people who each have their 3 that they're really investing in year over year until the impact is everything it could be.
Yeah, I remember having that experience in a side-by-side way where I had the youth group where I was the middle, where it was all about Annie. But then I had World Youth Day in 2013 in Rio de Janeiro. I had this young woman come, who I wasn't quite sure why she even signed up to go on this pilgrimage, because she seemed to hate my guts. I was like, why is she choosing to spend 2 weeks with me in Brazil? But whatever. Brazil was probably more enticing than her dislike of me, which it's Brazil. And most I could ever get out of this girl was 1 or 2 words. Even the whole pilgrimage. How's it going? Fine. Great. One of the last days we were there, we're coming down from the mountain with a Cristo Redentor. And she comes up alongside me and says, so, after all of this has been such a great experience. I've had such an amazing encounter with God on this, but I want to keep it going. It's like, I don't even know how to say this. When this is all done, would you be willing to just meet with me at Starbucks once a week and just, I don't know, walk with me? And once I picked my jaw up off the ground for all the words she just said in a row, and then not only was she speaking to me, but she was asking me to accompany her in her faith. So I was like, She said, and I think my friend Emma would like to do this too.
Oh, cool.
So we met at the youth room of St. Arbuck's, that right by the high school. And I shout out to Father Agostino for giving me that line. We met at the coffee shop every week and just read through scripture, talked about their prayer lives, talked about their relationships. It was so simple. It required no planning, just attention. And I'm watching these girls in their faith life explode. Meanwhile, the youth group where I'm in the middle, I'm watching it dwindle and dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. I'm like, what is happening here? And what was happening here was individual accompaniment. And it was around that time that we said, we need to shift this model because this over here is unhealthy. Youth groups aren't unhealthy. Youth groups with me in the middle are. It's got to be about the Lord, and we have to make it feel smaller. So it was just such a stark contrast. Yeah,
it's great. It goes back actually to our first podcast where we talk about events. And one person can be the center of an event for 20 people or 50 people or 1,000 people. One person cannot accompany in the way you describe more than 3 or maybe 5 people. So that's why we need so many individual mentors in the youth ministry process to accompany all those who need to be accompanied.
We often think in the Gospels of Jesus at events. We think of the Sermon on the Mount. We think of him feeding the 5,000, where when we really look at the Gospels, the majority of the time, he is speaking to an individual. He's speaking to the 12, and more often to the 3, Peter, James, and John.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something I want to add to this too is we chatted about consistency, and those groups, the cores, need to be consistent, and life happens. Leaders move on, they move away, they get a job transition, something else happens, they have a kid, whatever. But I think what you can do is if you think of these groups, try to get at least 2 leaders in there. Mm-hmm. Don't just have one, try to have 2 at all times. Because then what can happen is if one doesn't show up, at least you have one there, another one there, and there's consistency. Consistency matters in the life of a student, consistency matters in the life of groups. And you can choose your 3 and invest in them, but when it comes to the group dynamic, your consistency, you have to think about consistency. Yeah. And just expect that life's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great tip.
All right. Another area that would love to ask you guys about, because I know plenty of our youth ministers have wrestled with this question. We're talking right now about kind of the scarcity mentality of, oh, shoot, I've got to find good volunteers. Yeah. Now you're telling me it's not enough that I get them. They have to actually be good, qualified volunteers. And yet, even in the midst of that, we're also going to have a lot of people who may want to do youth ministry, but might not be a good fit for the vision we're striving to live into. How have you guys handled that?
Yeah, I've had to fire volunteers. Annie, have you had to fire volunteers?
Yes.
Yeah. I've had a lot of people, some people I had to just say, hey, you're not a student guy. This isn't going to work. And they're like, thank you for telling me that. I'm out. It's like...
and I find it's helpful to have that conversation, if it's possible, before they start working with young people. Like, I had people come to me and say, hey, I want to work with teenagers, and yada, yada, yada. And it was very clear that they just wanted to lead an apologetics class. They had a great heart for the truth of the faith, but relational ministry with a 15-year-old was not going to be a healthy fit for anybody. So what I found was helpful is to be prepared for those conversations. Is find another place for them, because they have a great gift potentially.
Yes.
Where's a healthy place for them to use it? And so that's why it's really important for the youth minister to have good relationships with the other staff and the other programs that are happening in the parish, because then you can say, this isn't going to be the best fit for you. I want you to talk to Karen, because I think you may have a great gift for what Karen's doing over here. So instead of them receiving, the church doesn't want you.
Yeah.
There's another place for you in the church. This just isn't it.
And when you make the handoff, because it's a handoff, make sure you follow up.
Yes.
Sometimes we hand off and don't do anything with it. You have to hand off and do a follow-up as well.
That's great.
Because the way in which we hand off matters just as much as handing off.
Yeah. And this is a scary concept we're talking about. I'm sure there are a lot of youth ministers who are listening or saying, I hope that never happens to me, where I have an awkward situation where I have to get rid of a volunteer and invite them not to come back. But the truth is, if you're going to build a vibrant youth ministry program, an effective process, it's going to attract people, and you're going to probably have more people want to be part of it than you have space to be part of it. And I think for me, the key, whether it's youth ministry or evangelization or even RCIA, whatever it is, the key is make the audience that you're focusing on the most important thing. The volunteers are not the most important thing. And so if you have to say no to a volunteer, do it gently, but it's not the end of the world. Don't say yes to the wrong volunteer, because it might hurt the audience you're actually striving to serve.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot here in this podcast about culture change, right? And I think it's really helpful. I was talking to a youth minister very recently in Ohio, who, in order to help that culture change, he's actually eradicated the word volunteer from his small group ministry in particular, because the word volunteer has a lot of connotations that come along with it, and occasionally some baggage. And there's adults in the parish who hear the youth minister needs volunteers for X, Y, and Z, and they hear warm body with a textbook. And if we're trying to move away from that mentality in ministry altogether, it's helpful to change our language so that they know that they're about something entirely different. So he doesn't use that word. He uses mentorship and apprenticeship. And they say, wait, what do you mean by that? And so it creates a space for curiosity. And he explains, you will be sharing content. The content of the faith is very, very important. And you're also going to be creating space for listening and dialogue and all of these things. And so because of the change in language, it opens up a conversation about the change in culture.
Every time we've had a guest on the show, we've gotten to close with a fun question that I've come to really enjoy. And I want to turn it to you guys. You guys are the experts today. I want to focus on the question of, if you had 10 minutes to sit down with adult volunteers who are pretty new to youth ministry, to talk to them about what it means for them to be empowered, what would you focus on?
Sorry to clarify. We're talking to small group leaders?
We're talking to adults good qualification. We're not talking about youth ministers.
Yeah, we're talking about
adults. Youth ministers the whole time.
Yeah.
If you're sitting down as a youth minister or as a trained consultant, talking to a team of adult volunteers, what would you tell them? What would be the most important concepts for you to focus on in talking about their need to be empowered?
Yeah, this is going to steal from something that it's not mine at all, but when you're talking to these leaders / volunteers / change the language, whatever you want to call them, I would say, hey, do for a few what you wish you could do for everyone. Do for a few what you wish you could do for everyone. And you're not doing that at the detriment of other people. You're just doing for a few what you wish you could do for everyone. And I would also remind them of, they probably have their own story of someone speaking into their life as a student. And now they have the chance to be that for someone else. And sometimes you need those reminders to get through the hard times, because there's going to be plenty of hard times if we're doing life on life with a young person. And you need to remind yourself that, week after week, consistency, being there, being present with your heart, your mind, being present, all of you present. You have to think back of how you were formed by someone adult speaking into your life, and that you could potentially be that for your few that you have with you.
I would say two things. The first is, you are necessary, that you are not just an ancillary part of this ministry and we'll take whoever we can get, but you are necessary, that God has called you to do this ministry, and this ministry cannot happen to its fullest potential without you, that you are needed, that you're not just a volunteer, you're a co-youth minister. You're arm in arm with the people in the office. The second thing is, in order to make disciples, you need to be a disciple.
Yes.
For the leaders, it is just important that we are encouraging them, not just in the technicalities of ministry, but in their own walk with the Lord. That we need to be encouraging them. And I'm speaking about youth ministers now, but if I'm talking to youth leaders, you need to pray. You need to have a daily prayer life. You need to be striving for a daily prayer life. It might not happen. I get it. I'm a mom. I have 4 kids. Like, sometimes my prayer life involves like sitting down, opening the Bible, and all of a sudden, like, people are like just there.
Hanging on you. Yes. Literally.
I read God's word.
Yeah.
I read God's word. That we are striving to be disciples ourselves, because we cannot make disciples unless we are disciples.
Really great stuff, guys. Thank you so much for continuing this journey with me. And thanks to all of you out there who've been going on this journey with us. Hope that you've been enjoying it as much as I have, and would love to get your comments, your feedback, your questions as we continue to unpack this relationship of moving from transactional ministry to transformational ministry under the lens of reproducibility and empowering adults. You've been listening to the Youth Ministry Mindset Podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
This has been the Youth Ministry Mindset Podcast, a limited series with voices from Alpha and YDisciple. To view the show notes from today's episode, or to submit a question for our hosts, visit youthministrymindset.com. Be sure to stay connected with Alpha and YDisciple on social media. Connect with Alpha on Facebook at facebook.com/alpha, or head to their website at alphausa.org/youth. Connect with YDisciple at facebook.com/YDiscipleLeader or at YDisciple.com. The Youth Ministry Mindset Podcast is sponsored by Net Ministries. Net Ministries, challenging young Catholics to love Christ and embrace the life of the church through retreat and discipleship ministry. 2.2 million young people reached since 1981. To learn more about the mission of Net Ministries or to book a Net retreat, visit netusa.org. We'll see you next time.